The taste of rejection is bitter. It sits on your tongue for decades, coating every word you swallow instead of speak. I know because I've been swallowing words for 60 years. My name is Carmen, and last Tuesday, I stopped begging my family for attention. What happened next changed everything. The phone calls stopped coming 3 years ago. Not all at once. That would have been merciful. They faded like everything else in my life. First, it was my son Miguel. "Mama, I'm busy with work." Then my daughter Rosa. "I'll call you back, Mama." But she never did. Even my youngest, Gabriel, the one who used to sit on my lap and tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world, he started forgetting my birthday. I watched my family drift away like leaves in autumn, and I kept reaching for them, calling, texting, showing up uninvited to their homes with homemade tamales they barely touched. The smell of masa and cumin that once filled their childhood kitchens now seemed to embarrass them. I became the mother who called too much, knocked too often, loved too loudly. For 60 years, I had been the woman who held everyone together. When my husband Carlos worked double shifts at the Ford plant, I was there. When the kids had nightmares, scraped knees, broken hearts, I was there. When Carlos got sick and couldn't work anymore, I cleaned houses during the day and took care of him at night. My hands grew rough from bleach and worry. My back bent from carrying everyone's burdens. And when he died 15 years ago, I thought my children would see me, really see me. Instead, they saw an obligation. I spent my 70s chasing after people who had already moved on. I'd call Miguel every Sunday, and he'd put me on speaker while he did other things. I could hear him typing, could hear his wife whispering in the background. I'd pretend not to notice. I'd show up at Rosa's house with groceries she didn't need, hoping she'd ask me to stay for coffee. She never did. "Thanks, Mama," she'd say, already closing the door. "I'll call you later." The word later became my least favorite word in English. I started volunteering at St. Mary's just to have somewhere to go, someone to talk to. The other volunteers were kind, but they had their own families to rush home to. I'd sit in my living room afterward, staring at photos of my children when they were small, when they needed me, when they looked at me like I hung the moon. The silence in that house was deafening. Last month, I fell in my kitchen. Nothing serious, just caught my foot on the edge of the rug. But I lay there for 20 minutes. Not because I couldn't get up, but because I realized nobody would know if I didn't. Nobody was coming to check on me. Nobody would notice if I didn't answer my phone because it never rang anyway. That's when something inside me shifted. I'd been begging for scraps of attention from people who had already decided I wasn't worth their time. I was calling them because I was lonely, but every conversation left me feeling more alone than before. They answered out of duty, not love. They spoke to me like I was a chore to complete, not the woman who raised them. Most people would tell you to keep trying, keep calling, keep showing love even when it's not returned. They'd say family is family. But I learned something that night on my kitchen floor. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop forcing people to pretend they care. So I made a decision. I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I stopped showing up uninvited with food they didn't want. I stopped begging for attention from people who had made it clear I was a burden. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I'd buried a husband and raised 3 children on my own. The first week was terrible. My fingers itched to dial Miguel's number. I walked to Rosa's house twice and turned around before reaching the door. I cooked Gabriel's favorite caldo de pollo and ended up eating it alone for 3 days. But something else happened during that first week. I noticed things. The way morning light hit my coffee cup just right. The sound of rain on my tin roof. A sound I'd forgotten to appreciate while I was busy worrying about people who wouldn't return my calls. I started reading again. Real books, not just the Bible on Sundays. I picked up novels I'd bought years ago but never had time to read because I was always cooking for people who wouldn't come or calling people who wouldn't answer. I discovered mysteries and romance novels and stories about women my age who were living full lives. I wasn't sure anyone would understand what I was going through. But if you're still listening to this old woman's story, maybe you know something about being invisible to the people you love most. By the third week, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness yet. That would come later. But peace. The constant ache in my chest, that feeling of reaching for something just out of grasp, started to fade. I stopped checking my phone every 10 minutes. I stopped jumping every time a car drove past, hoping it was one of them coming to visit. I started focusing on me. I joined a book club at the library. I started taking evening walks around the neighborhood. I learned that Mrs. Peterson next door had been wanting to talk to someone about her late husband for months. I discovered that the young mother across the street, Maria, sometimes needed someone to watch her toddler while she ran errands. For the first time in years, I felt useful. Not as someone's obligation, but as a person with something to offer. Then, 6 weeks after I stopped calling, my phone rang. It was Rosa. "Mama?" Her voice was different, uncertain. "Are you okay? You haven't called?" I almost fell back into my old pattern, apologizing, explaining, rushing to fill the silence with reassurances. But I caught myself. "I'm fine, Miha," I said simply. "Good," she said. But there was a pause, a long pause. I was just wondering how you're doing." It was such a small thing, but it was the first time in years one of my children had asked about me, not the other way around. 2 days later, Gabriel showed up at my door. Not for food, not because I'd called him 20 times. He came because he'd been thinking about me. "You've been quiet, Abuela," he said. That's what he'd called me since his daughter was born. "Everything all right?" We sat on this porch, where I'm talking to you now, and we had the first real conversation we'd had in months. Not me asking about his life while he gave me one-word answers. A real conversation where he asked about my book club, where he listened when I told him about the mystery novel I was reading. Miguel was the last to call. 3 weeks later. "Mama, Rosa said you haven't been calling us." His voice had something in it I hadn't heard in years. Concern. Real concern. "We were wondering, are you mad at us?" I could have said yes. I could have told him how many nights I'd cried, how many birthdays I'd spent alone, how many times I'd felt like I was bothering them just by existing. Instead, I told him the truth. "I'm not mad, mijo. I just realized I was doing all the reaching, and you were all doing all the backing away. I decided to stop chasing after people who didn't want to be caught." The silence that followed was longer than any silence we'd shared. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. "We never meant, Mama, we never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," I said. And I did know. They hadn't meant to hurt me. They'd just gotten busy, gotten comfortable, gotten used to me always being there whether they appreciated it or not. That love shouldn't feel like begging. About realizing that sometimes people need to feel your absence to remember your presence. Since I stopped chasing after my children's attention, our relationships have changed. Not perfect. Nothing ever is, but real. When Miguel calls now, he's not distracted. When Rosa invites me over, it's because she wants my company, not because she feels guilty. When Gabriel brings his daughter to visit, he stays for hours, not minutes. I still cook for them, but now they ask me to. I still offer advice, but now they ask for it. I still love them with everything I have, but now I love myself too. The book club meets every Thursday. Maria across the street brings her little boy over for coffee every Tuesday. Mrs. Peterson and I take walks every evening when the weather's nice. I have a life now that doesn't revolve around waiting for my phone to ring. At 83, I finally learned that begging for love doesn't work. But stopping the begging? That changes everything. If you've been carrying stories like this in your heart, stories about loving people who don't seem to love you back, subscribe. I've learned a lot in my 83 years, and I'm not done sharing. Sometimes the people who taught us the hardest lessons are the ones we loved the most. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the opportunity to miss us. And sometimes the most revolutionary thing an old woman can do is stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. I'm Carmen. I'm 83 years old. I live alone on this porch in San Antonio, Texas, and I'm not lonely anymore. Because I learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned. I learned that love doesn't have to hurt. And I learned that it's never too late to stop begging and start living. The taste of rejection may be bitter, but the taste? They'd started taking my love for granted because I'd never made the